Bob's way for years. But few, surely, had been as cruel as those that appeared in print just a few months earlier when Bob presided over the hanging of a young man in a small country town. Journalists are a bloodthirsty mob, eager to entertain their audiences with the most grotesque details of a man swinging from a rope. But being the good bloodhounds they are, they have caught a whiff of change in public sentiment and are campaigning fiercely. Whipped into a frenzy of righteous indignation by preachers and other do-gooders, polite society has now determined that capital punishment for anything less than murder is a crime before God, the act of an uncivilized nation. In Sydney, thousands had taken to the streets, walking solemnly in time to the beat of Handel's Dead March on muffled drums. They had signed petitions and gathered in growing fury to oppose the impending execution of Alfred, an Aboriginal man convicted on flimsy evidence of the rape of a 60-year-old woman. While the crowds prayed and lit candles and called on the Governor of New South Wales to show compassion, Bob had taken a train and then a Cobb & Co coach to Mudgee to carry out the government's orders and oversee the hasty erection of the gallows. He arrived to discover a town on edge. The governor of the local jail was racked by guilt over the impending hanging and was drowning his self-loathing in whiskey. The local carpenters had no experience putting together a scaffold, and Bob had to pay attention to every little detail, overseeing the placement of every beam and nail. Sandbags weighing roughly the same as Alfred had to be stitched together so the execution could be rehearsed and the drop for the body accurately measured. A reporter for one newspaper opposing the hanging stole the rope that Bob's assistant had brought from Sydney. A new one had to be quickly found, stretched, and soaked. On a bitterly cold morning, just after 9 o'clock, Bob and his assistant had escorted Alfred to the gallows. Despite all the obstacles and setbacks, the hanging went smoothly. Alfred, baptized hastily overnight as a Christian, had been dispatched to his new God with a minimum of fuss. Bob could once again take pride in his work. But back in Sydney, there was no respite from the attacks on his character. One newspaper gave its readers a long and brutal assessment of the execution. The wretched blackfellow was borne along between the frowsy executioners, who gripped his arms as though they liked their work of blood, it reported. Frowsy? Many readers would have to put down their evening shandy and reach for the dictionary to discover that Bob and his assistant looked scruffy and unkempt, sloppy and dishevelled, badly dressed and dowdy. And then came this. The hangman, 6 foot 2 inches in height, broad-shouldered, spider-legged, with arms like a gorilla, and a flat face without a nose, and huge feet, presented a spectacle to be seen nowhere else outside of Hades. There it was. Again. That flat face without a nose. The reporters never missed an opportunity to highlight his ruined features. Our hangman is a ghoul, began a typical report. He is known as Nosy Bob, a sobriquet earned through a disfigurement of his face. He was kicked by a horse and his nose so badly smashed as to almost obliterate all semblance of even a snout. Nosy Bob, the man with a gaping hole in his face. The accident had occurred years earlier, back when he was a coachman, ferrying the well-off around the streets of Sydney. He was a good-looking man back then, a tall, strapping fellow who would secure a second glance from even the most chaste of women. Well known, too. When the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Alfred, had toured the colonies in the 1860s, Robert Howard had been his preferred Sydney guide, steering His Royal Highness through Sydney's darkened streets and toward its best brothels. But one kick from that damn horse. It had changed everything. Songs and poems had been crafted and dedicated to Nosy Bob. One had been published to much acclaim in one of the newspapers about his journey to Mudgee for Alfred's hanging. The river gleams like a crystal floor, where the track meanders beside its shore, and reflected upon its mirrory bed goes the shade of the hangman's noseless head. People would laugh, children would stare, and all would sneer whenever he left his cottage and made his way to work at Darlinghurst Jail. The injury had cost him his job as a coachman because few of his regular clientele felt comfortable with a noseless driver holding the reins. He had doused his bitterness in grog for a while until the job of hangman was offered to him. It was a profession few others wanted to pursue. Everyone knew it had sent the previous incumbent tumbling towards insanity and life in an asylum.